Hi guys, Dr. Rachel Hippolyte here. So today we're talking about ADD or ADHD, so attention deficit disorder. You may have well heard it called one or the other. They've actually changed it from ADHD now, purely because a lot of clients don't actually have the hyperactivity part of ADHD. Okay, so basically, to understand what it is, here's our brain, okay? And there's a huge amount of ways to be able to treat it without medications. And I always like to start without medications because you often don't get the side effects that you can get with other medications. But the most important thing is with ADHD or ADD is to understand which areas of the brain are dysfunctioning, learn to love your brain, and also to get a diagnosis with which areas and which type of ADD perhaps you have or your children have. Now, ADD, if it goes undiagnosed, can actually have huge impact on a child or an adult's relationships, on their learning, on their self-esteem. You tend to find it's the ADHD ones that get diagnosed early because they are hyperactive, and the other ones may get missed. It's a really, really important diagnosis that quite often it is just seen that they are inattentive, they're naughty, or just not being able to learn, perhaps with learning disabilities. But it's like any brain dysfunction or where the brain signals aren't working as well as they should. Now, there's actually, although most doctors only recognize two types of ADD, which is your classic ADHD or your inattentive ADD. Now, they're actually both the same brain patterns, okay, but very, very different behavioral issues. Okay, this is our brain, okay, and I'm just going to describe just with the two main patterns with those two types of ADD. We have the frontal lobe or the prefrontal cortex, and then we have at the back we have the cerebellum, okay, and it's these two areas that tend to be of low functioning in ADHD and inattentive ADD, okay, and they generally can be treated the same. And because they're low function, these guys actually do respond to stimulant medication, okay? So ADD, what are the signs and symptoms? So other than the hyperactivity, it tends to be poor focus, okay? But not always poor focus. It'll only be poor focus for things that are routine, for things that are boredom. Okay, so when we have a low prefrontal cortex, we need to be excited. We need to constantly be doing new things, because what we're actually trying to do is we're trying to stimulate our own low functioning prefrontal cortex. We tend to be very, very disorganized, and we tend to get distracted really, really easily. And the reason for that is that the prefrontal cortex, when it's working well, actually calms down other parts of the brain. So what will happen is we will just have too much stimulus, okay? I'm a perfect example of someone with a low prefrontal cortex. And what happens is I'll get a thought, I'll hear a sound, I get an idea, I may feel something, a tag on my shirt, anything, and instead of this part of my brain being able to get rid of those sensations, it doesn't, and therefore I get distracted. I always kind of think of myself as a butterfly, you know, I'm focusing on something, get a thought, oh, butterfly, and off I go on to the next thing. So that means that we get really, really distracted, and when you're getting distracted and you're not able to focus on a task, basically what happens is we struggle with learning, we struggle remembering things, we struggle understanding things, and also we never ever get anything finished. I've actually got 3 books on the go, okay, because I'll get an idea, I'll be reading something, I'll get an idea, and off I go, and I'm on to the next thing. So we're not very good at at finishing tasks. We have a lot of things on the go, but we're also not very good at being able to see steps. So I always thought that I just wasn't very clever. I wasn't very good at learning, but it's actually because my prefrontal cortex wasn't working well, and therefore I couldn't set things out. I couldn't see the bigger picture, but it's just the way that my brain was wired. And once I actually learnt that, and I learnt tools to be able to help me learn, learning patterns, things got much, much easier from me. Now, I was already an adult when that happened, and I missed out on a huge amount of learning. I've caught it quite young in my son, and so we're already putting natural things in place to be able to help him to learn. We tend to get bored really, really easily. We like to think exciting things. So you may find these children can be quite defiant. They might start arguments. Okay. In an adult, it may be in a relationship that they're constantly causing arguments. They want drama, and it's purely because they're trying to stimulate this part of the brain. Okay. So it is nothing to do with intelligence, and that's the really important issue here, is that when children grow up thinking that they're just not clever, they're just stupid, they can't learn, then they get poor self-esteem, then they get poor self-worth, and then they never ever feel that they're able to achieve the goals and get the most out of their life. Okay, but with the right treatments, there's no reason why they can't learn in exactly the same way as a normal functioning brain. Okay, so we've spoken about the two areas of low prefrontal cortex and low cerebellum, and that's your classic and your inattentive. But there's actually other areas of the brain affected in different types of ADD, and this is of utmost important to recognize based on the behaviors that they are showing, based on the questionnaires that we give, to ensure that they are able to be treated correctly, because the treatments for the other types can be very, very different, and if you give them the wrong treatment, it can actually make it worse. So we have the overfocused ADD. Okay, so we still have the low prefrontal cortex. Again, this will drop off when we try and focus, especially with routine, boring tasks, so it actually gets worse. But we actually have the anterior cingulate gyrus here, so we actually have a high activity in the anterior cingulate gyrus, and you would have heard me speak about this. It's the gear shifter of the brain. So they will get a thought and then they can't let it go. But when you're trying to learn something, you need to go from thing to thing to thing in order to functionally learn. But if you're getting stuck on the last paragraph or the last thought, then you're not going to be able to learn efficiently. Okay, so this is actually seen often in grandchildren and children of alcoholics. Okay, it's certainly part of my history, and it's part of why my genetic brain function. And we talk about genetics in AD because it is often carried through in genetics or epigenetics. So if you feel, quite often if we see it in children, we can actually see it in undiagnosed parents of that children. Okay, so then we have the limbic system, the limbic ADD. So again, low prefrontal cortex, but then we actually have high limbic activity, and these clients tend to be very sad, quite depressed, but again still have the poor focus, the disorganization, the impulsivity, don't learn from their mistakes. And then we go on to the temporal lobe, okay? And the temporal lobe, again, we have the low PCF, but we often have low functioning of the temporal lobe. And we have mood instability with these clients. We have irritability, temper problems. So often these ones are seen as the ADHD ones. Okay, now then we have a ring of fire. Now the ring of fire ADD is where we have hyperactivity, so overactivity in numerous area of the brain. Now these ones that we have to be careful about. Hyperactivity, so they may be anxious, they come across as hyperactive, but if you give these guys a stimulant, it will make them 100 times worse. So if you've ever been given a stimulant because of ADD and it hasn't worked, look into whether you are actually a ring of fire ADD. And then we have the basal ganglia ADD. Okay, so the basal ganglia we know is that part of the anxiety regulation. Okay, so we have ADD, low prefrontal cortex, okay, which drops. So we all have all the poor focus, the disorganization, the poor distractibility, the poor impulse control. But these clients are also very anxious. They fear the worst. They get stuck on those negative thoughts. So treating ADD, you can treat it with natural ways. And the first thing that I always look into is diet. Okay, a diet that's high in sugar is not good for an ADD person. Okay, so you really need to concentrate on your diet. Give them high dose fish oils. Now your fish oils will depend on whether you are a hyperactive or a hypoactive. And fish oils, we have the EPA and the DHA. EPA is your stimulating. DHA is your calming. Okay, so most of them you'll want a bit of both, but you really don't want to be giving a stimulating for a brain that is overactive in all areas. So that is, and then you want to treat with supplements specific to the areas of dysfunction, and we can talk about those later. I use supplements, but specific to your brain type. Okay, so that is ADD in a nutshell. There are 7 types of ADD, and it is utmost important to work out which parts of your brain are over-functioning or under-functioning to get the best treatments. Okay, but it doesn't mean to say that you need to take medication. There are a huge amount of ways to help you learn to heal your brain and to help it function better. All right, guys, thank you.